As we are approaching Pesach, it's only natural that today we learn a sugya that is associated with Chag HaMatzos. And the sugya we will be discussing today is fascinating, interesting, profound. And we have some very substantial chidushim, and I will try to explain to the best of my ability. Rabban Gamliel hoyu oimer, Psachim Kufte Zayin Amud Aleph in a Mishnah, and we're familiar with this passage, with this Ma'amar Chazal from Agoda Shel Pesach. Rabban Gamliel hoyu oimer kol shel yom shloisha dvorim eilu lo yotzi yadecha v'osai. Pesach zeh she'anu oichlem al shumma. Say Matza, say Maror. Why do we eat Pesach Matzah Maror? You need to explain. But Rabban Gamliel doesn't elaborate and explain. Which chayva? Which mitzvah? Neither do we find an explanation in the Gemara and the Rishonim on this spot. And there are two different interpretations, possible interpretations. Number one, Lo yotzi dechavose b'mitzvahs Pesach Matzah u'Maror. Number two, Lo yotzi dechavose b'mitzvahs Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Some Gedolim understand Lo yotzi dechavose b'mitzvahs Pesach Matzah u'Maror. Haggadah Shel Pesach Divrei Shoel, one of the greatest Gedolim of his era, maybe the greatest. 180 years ago, Rabbi Yosef Shol Natan's under Shoel HaMeshiv. His contemporary, Bekuri Yankov El Chasuka Tov Reish Chof Hei Sif Kotten Gimel, Rabbi Yankov Ettlinger. He was the greatest Godel in Germany at the time, the Rav of Altona and Hamburg. And they both understand, Lo Yotze Dechavose Bepesach Matzah Maror, and they connect, associate Rabbi Gamliel with the Bach, famous Bach, Simen Ches El Chasitza Simen Tov Reish Chof Hei, the Bach says, above and beyond the general halacha of mitzvahs tzrichas kavona, which is a general kavona, an awareness that he's makayim a mitzvah and he wants to be yotzeh. Three mitzvahs require an additional level of kavona, a specific kavona to the reasoning, the rationale of this mitzvah. Tzetzes, and why? Because the pasuk says, leman tiskeru, as kol mitzvosai. Tefillin, leman tia toires Hashem beficho ki v'yad chazok atziyach Hashem b'Mitzrayim. And sukkah, Sikus deis v'shivas yomim, leman yedu d'resechem ki b'sukkos yishafti es b'nei Yisrael b'tzi yoysa mi'eretz Mitzrayim. And because regarding these three mitzvahs, the reasoning, the rationale, the objective is in the Torah, you need to be mechavin. You need to have intention on those Tamei HaMitzvahs. And those two Gedolim feel the same regarding Rabban Gamliel, same idea. Kol shel yom Pesach Matzah Maror shoni ochlem, you're not yotzeh the mitzvahs of Pesach Matzah and Maror. I don't think so. If that is the kavanah of Rabban Gamliel, so why doesn't the Bach say 6 mitzvahs and not 3? Tzitzis, Tefillin, Sukkah, Pesach, Matzah, u'Maror. Well, maybe we could explain why he doesn't mention Pesach. The Bach is on the Tur. The Tur only deals with mitzvahs noiges bisman and said we don't have Korban Pesach today, and that's why he just ignores Pesach. But what about Matzah and Maror? That's one question. The bigger question is, the Bach is all about kavona. Rabban Gamliel speaks about amira kol sheloi omar. He doesn't say kol shelo kivein. And by kavonas mitzvah there is no need to vocalize, to verbalize. You just need to think and bear in mind. Kavona lachud v'amira lachud. So to me it's obvious that Rabban Gamliel is referring to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And it's obvious to me for another reason as well. The entire Mishnah and the Mishnah before talk about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. That is the context. The Mishnah before, the Mishnah says, Kana ben Shoel, and the father must respond. And the father is Matchal b'gnesu Messiah b'shvach. And then Rabban Gamliel says, Kol shel yom shleish dvorim lo yosech avosai. And then the Mishnah says, we say Hallel. And so the context is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And Rabban Gamliel talks about kol shaloi omar. So the chiddush of Rabbi Gamliel, the way I understand it, is to be yotze properly the mitzvah of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not enough to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. You also need to explain how Pesach, Matza, Maror fit in to the bigger picture, to the bigger pattern, how they fit into the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that is why I need to explain why we eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And it's a din in Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim. But then the question is, but why doesn't it have to do with the Bach? What is the difference in tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah? This brings to mind another question. Kol shalayomar Pesach Matzav Amora she'ona oichlam al shuma lo yetzech avosei. And how do we know why we eat Pesach Matzah Amora? How would we know? How can we know? Lo darshin an ta'ame dekro. It's a machlokes Yehuda v'Reb Shimon bo Metzia Kufta Zayin the Rambam Amalva v'Loi v'Paskins in accordance to the Yehuda. We don't know what the Torah doesn't tell us. So by Korban Pesach the Torah does tell us. Va'amartem zevach Pesach hu l'Shem asher posach al botei b'nei Yisrael. But the Torah doesn't tell us why we eat matzah, and the Torah does not tell us why we eat maror. All the Torah tells us about maror is two psukim in Baloiso, Pesach Rishon, Pesach Shani. O matzahs al marorim yochliu, v'al matzahs al marorim yochliu, v'al matzahs al marorim yochliu. There's no mention in the Torah why we eat maror. So how are we supposed to explain to our children what we don't know? I'm just briefly mentioning Minchas Osher Pashas Chukas, Chumash Bamidbar. I wrote a big arichus. And I brought 15 different sources in which we find not only Chazal, even the Rishonim, do offer explanations and mitzvahs Torah, and they paskin in accordance to those understandings, bein l'chumra, bein l'kula. So sometimes Chazal do know what is not specifically written in the Torah. But that's a discussion I can't get in today. What I do want to say regarding our sugya is, there are two different approaches in the Rishonim. What is Rabbi Gamliel based on? From where does he learn that if you don't say, you're not Yoitze? Tosfos writes, V'amartem zevach Pesach hu l'Shem, ve'iskeshu matzah mamoreh ve'Pesach. There's a hekesh matzah mamoreh le'Pesach, al matzah samroirim yochluhu. And by Pesach the Torah clearly says, V'amartem zevach Pesach hu l'Shem asher posach al botei b'nei Yisrael. The same refers to matzah and maror. But we know why we eat Pesach. We don't know why we eat matzah and maror. But if the Torah tells us you should explain, the Torah means to tell us you should know. And if you don't, try to figure it out. Use your imagination. Use your wisdom. Use your Ruach HaKodesh. Nimsar adov al HaChachamim. And what Chachamim will understand, that becomes Torah. Shaboy Le'eleket Siman Reish Yud Ches is similar to Tosfos, but he bases his explanation on another pasuk. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li. Ba'avur zeh means we point to the Pesach and we say this is for a reason. And then the matzah, then the maror. We eat Pesach, asher posach al botei b'nei Yisrael. We eat matzah shalisbek b'tzeikom lachmetz. And the reason we eat maror is when maror was chayayim. So according to Tosfos, we learn this principle from V'amartem zevach Pesach hu l'Shem. According to Shabbos Le'eleket, ba'avur zeh. Bein lamar, bein kach ubein kach. You need to explain. And if you need to explain, you need to understand. And if it's not written, make it up. Use your understanding, your das Torah, your insight, your Ruach HaKodesh. But nevertheless, the reasons of Matzah and Maror are not written in the Torah, and that is why it has nothing to do with the Bach. The Bach says what's mefurish b'Torah, you need to have kavana. Matzah and Maror are not mefurish b'Torah. So why doesn't he mention Korban Pesach? I said before, because it's not noyeg bizman hazeh. So b'korah b'yameinu, when Mashiach will come, I think the Tur will be in a lot of stress and pressure. The Rambam will sit back and smile and say, Misha torach b'erev Shabbos yochel b'Shabbos. I had this in mind. I was waiting for the Geula, so in my Mishnah Torah I wrote everything. You just need to look it up. You have Hilchas Korban Pesach. But the Tur had a different philosophy, and the Tur only write mitzvahs and oiges bizman hazeh. I think the Tur will sit down In his Baidim, I think it'll take him 3 months. And after 3 months, Oiz Vahadar will come out with a big publicity campaign. The new Torah, Chodesh v'Hamechudesh, Hashorim v'Hamushlam, 25 volumes, Kodshim, Taharos, Zeroim, everything. And the Bach will need to be updated. So maybe in the new version of the Bach, Oiz V'Hodor, Tov Shin Pei Beis, the Bach will write there are 4 mitzvahs in which you need to have a specific kavanah. Tzitzis, Tefillin, Sukkah, and Korban Pesach. Because by Korban Pesach, the Torah does say, Asher Posach Harbote B'nei Yisrael. In second thought, no. I don't think Korban Pesach will be included in the new version, and I'll explain why. Prima Godam Esimach Chofai writes, according to the Bach, there's another mitzvah which you're not mekayim unless you have kavanah, and that is the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Because the Posuk clearly says, and we say this Posuk, we quote this Posuk every day in the morning after Anochas Tefillin, V'chol b'choyer odem bevonecho tivda, v'hoyu ki yisholchu binchu mochalei mamazois v'yomatu elav, ki v'choyzik yodoi tziyonu Hashem eMitzrayim. So it's clearly stated in the Torah why we have a mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. And you need to have that in mind according to the Bach. And we're all taken aback because, yes, it's true, Pidyon Haben is not noeg b'kol yoim, like tzitzis and tefillin, not even once a year like Sukkah, but nevertheless it's a very common mitzvah. According to the Prima Godim and the Bach, you're not mekayim the mitzvah, and yes, bear this in mind, that we never heard that b'shas Pidyon Haben people have this in mind. So I think, lo kedivra Prima Godim, we need to differentiate between a reason and an objective. Tam v'tachalis. Tam is not tachlis. Tam is an explanation. Tachlis is an objective, a goal. It is only when the Torah says laman, that is the tachlis of a mitzvah. And if that's the tachlis, that's what you need to achieve, and you need to perform the mitzvah in a way you should be able to achieve the objective of the mitzvah. I want to prove my point, because I know it's a chiddush. So let's just briefly have a look at Parshas Tzitzis. What do we have in Parshas Tzitzis? All we need to do is open a Seder and just briefly read Perek Gimel of Kriyas Shema. ויאמר השם אל מוישה דבר בני יסוד ויאמרתו להם ויוסר להם ציצס על כנפי וידיהם לדורייסם ונשנו הציצס הכנף פסיל תחילס והויו לכם לציצס וראיסם אויסוי וזכרתם את כל מצוות השם ועשיסם אויסם. So the Torah already at the beginning of the Parsha explains why. What is the reason? והויו לכם לציצס וראיסם אויסוי זכרתם את כל מצוות השם ועשיסם אויסם. Why doesn't the Bach quote this pasuk? He only quotes the second pasuk. ולא יססו אחריו ואחריכם מה שאתם זוינם אחריהם. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי. Why does he skip pasuk number 1 and go over to pasuk number 2? I argue for a very simple reason. Pasuk number 1 is an explanation. Pasuk number 2 is an objective. And it's not coincidence that all 3 psukim the Bach quotes are למען. למען תזכרו es kol mitzvosai ushmartem vasisam ma'asam laman tiyeh toras Hashem beficho laman yedu dorasechem. If the Torah says what the tachlis is, you need to bear that in mind. Not reasoning, not explanations. By Pidyon Haben, the Torah says, v'hoyu ki yesholchu bincho mochaleim amazois. If your child will ask, this is what you'll explain to him. But if he doesn't ask, you don't need to bear this in mind. By Korban Pesach, once again, va'amartem zevach Pesach ul Hashem. Va'amartem, that's in the context of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim. Not in the context of Kiyum Mitzvahs Korban Pesach. Kach nere la'ani daiti. So in the new version of the Bach, it'll still be 3. But I have another question. I said before, didn't I mention before that by Matza, the Torah doesn't give us a reasoning. Does or doesn't. In Parshas Re'eh, Lo yisoichel olav chometz, shivas yomim toichel olav matzas lecha moiniki b'chapozim yitzosam yiyatzim Mitzrayim, leman tizker es yom tzeischu Mitzrayim kol yom echayecho. So by Matza, the Torah also says leman. Why is leman tizkor different than leman tizkeru? The answer is a simple one. This posuk does not refer to the mitzvah of achilas matzah, but rather to the isur of achilas chometz. And by Sheval Taisa, there never is a concept of kavona. Only in mitzvahs to say that we perform b'kum v'asei. So the pasuk says, Lo yisoichel olav chometz, shivas yomim toichel olav matzas lechamoini. But we don't have a mitzvah b'chilas matzah shivas yomim. Chilas matzah is only one night, and the pasuk is a different pasuk, be'erev toichel matzos. Minchas Osher Chele Gimel on Pesach. This sefer came out in the midst of the Corona season, so didn't really have a very broad. We didn't have that many sales. But in Chele Gimel, Minchas Osher on Pesach, there's a lengthy siman on mitzvahs matzah called Shivo. There are big chidushim in there, but we don't have time to discuss that today. I just want to explain, this is not the posuk of mitzvahs achilas matzah. It is only the gra. The opinion of the Gaon is, matzah called shivas achilas reshus. It's not a chiv, but it still is a mitzvah. So if you want to connect the gra and the bach, one would say, if you want to be makayim the mitzvah reshus of achilas matzah called shiva, you need to bear in mind leman tizker siyom says chumiyatz Mitzrayim. But this posuk does not refer to the mitzvah of achilas matzah. But I still have another question. Another posuk in Parshas Re'eh. Another mitzvah in which the Torah says leman, and that is achilas matzah sheni b'Yerushalayim. Aser ta'aser is called towards zarecho. Hayoytza soda shona shona v'chaltu lefnei Hashem elokecho b'mokom asher yifcha l'shakan shemo yisham leman tilmad liyiros Hashem elokecho kol hayomim. Leman tilmad liyiro. Why is leman tilmad liyiro different than leman tizkeru? Leman tiyeh Torah Hashem beficho or leman yedu d'oreseichem. So once again, we don't complain on the Bach because Achilas matzah sheni b'Yerushalayim is not noyeg b'zman hazeh. It's not in the Torah, so why would it be in the Bach? But I mentioned the new publication of the Bach. The new publication, Nissan Tovshin Pei Beis, Mashiach is coming, and the Bach will update his work. Will there be 4 tzitzis, tefillin, sukkah, plus matzah sheni b'Yerushalayim? L'chayre yes. Leman tilmad liyiro. But maybe no. Tosfos in Bava Basra Chafalaf explains, Leman tilmad liyiro. And Tosfos quotes this free. Person accumulated matzah sheni, and he's paid a matzah sheni peres al mois, and he comes with a lot of money to Yerushalayim. And Yerushalayim he buys food until he doesn't finish consuming all the maisa money he accumulated. He's in Yerushalayim. So Tosfos explains, Yosha b'Yerushalayim ad shaloi yigma matzah sheni shebiyodoi. And while he's in Yerushalayim, he sees the koyanim. He sees the holiness. He's inspired. He absorbs the kedusha, and that is leman tilmad liyira. And Tosfos expands and expounds on the safri. And Tosfos writes, Kishu b'Yerushalayim roya kedusha gedoyla v'koyanim b'avidosam v'af hu noisen eliboy talmud v'yira shumayim. So leman tilmad liyira is actually a result, and not a direct result of eating matzah sheni Yerushalayim, but the general experience of being in Yerushalayim and observing and experiencing and being moved and inspired, absorbing the kedusha, observing and absorbing, being moved by the kedusha gedolim and looking at the koyanim hakedoshim. So leman tilmad liyira is not directly associated with eating. It's different than tzitzis and tefillin and sukkah, in which the kavana, the result, is associated with etzem kiyum mitzvah. Matzah sheni is different. It's not a kavana that you need to have b'shas achilas matzah sheni. It just happens. It should happen. It would happen. Let it happen. Leman tilmad liyiro Hashem elokecho. just by being in Yerushalayim and spending time in Yerushalayim. And that is why it is different than Laman Tiskuru Vasisa Miskol Mitzvah Laman Tia Teres Hashem Befiruch Kevachoisik Yod Mitziach Hashem HaMitzrayim Laman Yedu Dorosechem Ki Besukkos Hashafti Es B'nei Yisrael Bo Yitzi Yosamei Es Mitzrayim. Kach ner ani ezdaiti. I think this was a very interesting shir, at least to me, from my point of view. And we said some very substantial chidushim, which I feel very strongly. So there's one posuk, which I quoted in today's shir, and we quote this posuk 4 times B'leila Seder. If we quote this posuk 4 times B'leila Seder, obviously, it conveys a very special message, which is so relevant to this magnificent night. Which posuk is it? So it would be important to know what's pshat in this posuk. We have 2 different pirushim. Rabbeinu Sadigon and the Rashbam and Arve Psochem have 1 perush. Ba'avu zeh is as if the posuk says Zeh ba'avur. We point at the Matza and we say Zeh ba'avur sheposach Hashem arbote b'nei Yisrael. We point, that's Pesach. We point at the Matza and we say Zeh ba'avur lo yisbek b'tzeikom l'achmetz. We turn to the Maror and we say Zeh ba'avur v'yamoror eschayim. But Rashi, Rosh HaParshonim v'Rosh HaPashtonim, the greatest commentator of them all, first and foremost amongst Rabbeinu Rishonim, Rashi simply says, Ba'avur zeh kedei she'akayem mitzvotav kegon Pesach Matza u'Maror. We left Mitzrayim. We were freed from Mitzrayim, not to be a free people. No longer slaves of a mortal, of a human being. No longer slaves of Parei Arosha. From now on, servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li kedei she'akayem mitzvotav kegon Pesach Matza v'Maror. So when the Rasha says, Mohu avoido hazois lachem, and the Yerushalmi has a more lengthy and more nasty version of the question of the Rasha. Psochem Sameches in Yerushalmi, Ma hatorach hazeh she'atem matrichim aleinu b'kol shana v'shana. What's this burden you put on us, you impose on us every year? He doesn't like this night. He doesn't like Leila Seder. One of my earliest recollections as a child, I will never forget this. My great father was always so friendly and outgoing. And once he invited a non-Frim Jew to the Seder, and the person sat across me, and I seemed to like him. And he sat across me, and I looked at his face. He was such a nebuch. I felt bad for him. He knew nothing about Yiddishkeit, and he thought he's being invited to a meal. He was waiting for good food. My father was a big Eloi, and it took hours. My father said pshetlach and perperois and pshotim and vertlach, and my older brothers already knew learning, understood learning, and he talked to them. And this person was patient, he was polite, but he really was a nebuch. So when it came to Matza, Oro Einov, he didn't know what's waiting for him. Took his Eisim Matza and then Maror. He barely made it through Maror. Started to breathe as a free man, and then Koirech. By the time we got to the meal, he was already too depressed and too tired to enjoy it. He was a good Yid, just a Tinnik Shenishba. But according to Yerushalmi, the Rosh asks, Mo avoido hazeh lachem, ma torech hazeh shetem matrichim aleinu. And we simply say, if this is a burden to you, then you should have still been a Mitzrayim. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. We were freed kedei lekayem et mitzvahs kegon Pesach Matza v'Maror. If you don't like mitzvahs, then ilu hayasham lo hayonigal. And then we turn our attention to the She'eni Yadei Alishal. He's a sweet boy. He doesn't get it. And we tried everything. Oikre Mr. Shulchan, Machalken Kaloyes V'Goyze, Matbilim Shnei Pa'omim, Kedei Sheyeshalu Abonim, to no avail. Einoi Yodea Lishal. He's just not there. We give him a big hug, and we say, our dear child, you don't know what to ask. So obviously, you're not going to be a great philosopher. You don't know how to ask, but you do know how to eat. That's more important. Let's do the mitzvahs. Let's eat Pesach, let's eat Matza, let's meet Maror, because this is more important than anything else. Yes questions, no questions. You did ask, you didn't ask. Let's go through the mitzvahs. And we quote that same posek. Ba'avur ze osu Hashem li kedei she'ekayem mitzvotav. And why is it that important? Why wouldn't it be enough to remember that our forefathers were redeemed from Mitzvah? Why do we feel that it is about us? Of course you need to feel it's about you, because it is you that needs Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shamayim. It is you that needs to perform the mitzvahs. It's not enough that your forefathers did the mitzvahs. It's about you, and only about you. And that is why and finally we say, the time to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is the same time as we need to eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, because they're intertwined, they're one and the same. Because Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim has a goal and an objective, and that goal is Ba'avur Zeh Kadei She'ekayem Mitzvotav. And therefore, the time to tell the story is the time to eat Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. This is the central message of Leila Seder. Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim, avodeiheim asher yotzei siyoisa mi'eretz Mitzrayim. And Rashi once again explains, Kedei shetekaimu mitzvotai. Maaseh b'Rebbe Eliezer, v'Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, v'Rebbe Yeshua, v'Rebbe Akiva, v'Rebbe Taf, and Shlomo ben Kol Oisei Alayla b'Bnei Barak. V'yoiskem b'Yetzias Mitzrayim. Ad shebou talmideihem v'amru Rabbi Seinu Hagia Zman Kriyas Shema Shel Shacharis. At the end of the night, all the Talmidim felt spontaneously, time has come for Kabbalah's Oil Malchus Shamayim. Hagia Zman Kriyas Shema. Let me share with you a Hasidic story that I speak about every year before Pesach. Hasidim Mesaprim, the great Tzaddik Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, loved every Jew, and he had a special fondness to Amei Oretz Shebiyisol, to the simpletons, the simple people, the Tmimistic people. And as the story goes, before he came home to his holy Seder, he used to listen behind the doors of the simpletons in Berdichev to hear how they do their Seder. And once he was standing behind the door of a Poshet Shamas in a shul, and he sees the father talking to his children, and the father says, many years ago, I was a little boy, I learned in Cheder, and I remember that Rebbe said, Tzorech laharich be'echad. I don't remember what it was about at all. I don't remember anything else, but I do remember Tzorech laharich be'echad. And I see in this coming paragraph in the Agada, it says 4 times echad. So we're going to have in mind, and we're going to be makayim this aloha tzorech laharach be'echad. And the father, together with all his children, beis lahav start. Keneged arboa bonim dibro toiro. Echad chacham. Echad rosha. Sounds amusing. And the tzaddik lifts his eyes to the heavens and he says, Rabbeinu Shalom, habeit mishumayim arei. Kikarup of Danazisa Kindalach. 2,000 years ago, in the days of the greatest Tanom, it took all night, and it is only Be'alois Shachar that the Talmidim felt, Hegia Zman Kriyas Shema, time has come to be Mekabel Or Malchus Shamayim. And this Poshet Yid, he barely started the Seder, and he is already Marich Be'echot. And then the Berditchev Tzaddik added on, Hegia Zman Kriyas Shema Shel Shacharis. Shacharis is Rosh HaTevis Chochem, Rosh HaTam, She'eni Yodeya. We all pray and we all hope and we all daven that all our children should be Talmidei Chachamim. Halavai. But it doesn't always work out that way. Children are children, human beings are human beings. And each of them has his own challenges, his own nisyonis, and own issues. So some of our children are Talmidei Chacham Baruch Hashem. Some fit into the other categories. At the night of the Seder, we invite them all, and we hope they all will be seated around the table. And we hope that they will all ask questions. And we cannot dictate to them what and how to ask their questions and to air out their issues. And we also hope we will have the right answers to their questions. Echad Chacham, Echad Rosha, Echad Tam, Ve'echad She'enoi Yodea Lisha. And ultimately we hope that at the end of this magnificent night, they will all together say, Per Echad, Higia Zman Kriyas Shema. And why is that? Because Ba'avur Zeh, Osu Hashem li mitzeisim mitzrayim, kedei she'akayem mitzvotav. I think this magnificent night is so important. It deserves our attention. I think everyone should prepare. The Ramah brings a minhag, Shabbos HaGodel, you say the entire Haggadah. Not many people do that today. One should. Some rely on the Shabbos HaGodel drosha. But I think it's so important. Take out a few Haggadahs, the ones you like. Prepare. What is the message you want to convey? What is the message you would like to talk out to your grandchildren, to your children? What do you expect them to take away from this magnificent night? Ultimately, it's all about Higia Zman Kriyas Shema Shel Shachris. Ba'avur Zeh Osu Hashem li mitzeisim mitzrayim kedei she'akayem mitzvotav. We should all have a kusha and freilich and Yom Tov. Be'ezus Hashem, next week we'll be together once again, and we will discuss another sugya of Hilchos Pesach. Kol Tov.